to be, since we spend a lot of our time outside, we want to be in an area we enjoy. There are definitely ag areas in this country that are just acres and acres of cornfields that isn't something that we really enjoy. So, um, waking up and be able to work in this type of area is something we definitely enjoy and is important. Um, so I'm going to go through a start sort of at the beginning, and this is probably the first, 5, 6 years of our farming. We were building a farm basically from scratch. When we moved there, there was a small house, there was a well, there was electricity, but really no buildings. We looked at farms that had dairy farms on them or other infrastructure or ones with much better soil and fields. Um, but we instead bought close to raw land that we could plan and develop what we wanted to put on it. Um, we found a lot of dairy farms that where they had lots of barns, they had an old house, but everything was really dilapidated and had been just used for 40 years and nothing had been improved. So if we would be buying what looked like a beautiful old house and a beautiful old barn and fields that all needed, the fields all needed liming, the barn needed a roof, or more. The house was, poorly insulated. So instead, we were able to start and build what we needed for what we wanted to do, and we did that. So I think we probably stopped adding infrastructure at this point, but have done it gradually over the last 30 years. We did, as I said, add a child early on. That was a very a decision that we made early on that we wanted to not just develop a farm and then add a kid. We wanted to build a farm with that in mind because we definitely know people that have said, "Oh, I don't have time to have children because of the farm," and they develop this farm and then 10 years in they have a baby, and it doesn't always work well because the farm wasn't developed with children in mind. So we wanted to do that from the beginning, and definitely having our daughter Rosemary, affected how the farm developed over the years, and that's we really liked doing it that way. Um, and as you can see, we this early picture with horses, we have had horses and have used them in traction for the sole life of the farm and continue to do so. So we started thinking we were going to be a vegetable farm. We we both came from a set of non-farming background, but seemed like vegetables was a good thing to get into. We did have about an acre of flat land, and so that is what we sort of started doing, growing sort of all the general sort of 40 plus vegetable crops to see what worked. Um, and built a small greenhouse for transplants for the field production. And we're able to get into our local farmers market. We started at a regional one, at a real local one, and then moved on to the Ithaca Farmers Market within, I think, a month or two. Um, Many of you may have heard of that market. It is an excellent market, and um, we didn't move to Ithaca for that reason, but we definitely knew that market existed. I had been involved with it a little, and when I was much younger, and we knew that was um, a really excellent close marketing opportunity. We're probably 4 hours from New York City, which is also a great marketing opportunity, but it's, you know, over 4 hours away and quite a, not really practical, but potentially you can do really well there. Here we had a market that is, comparable to some extent and only, half an hour and away. So this has been really important to our growth and our ability to sell and grow lots of different products. And you can see here, a smattering of the vegetables, some plants, garlic, just sort of getting started. But my daughter's always been involved in the farm, and she always actually had her own flock of chickens, and this is her silky chickens that she maintained all the way through basically through college. We started adding animal production again in very small amounts. We have known farms that have started, in year one fairly small, and by year two, they're producing, thousands and thousands of poultry, or you name it. We did grow gradually. Broilers were a good start. We started with the Salatin method, it's called, of raising chickens in these pasture pens. We very quickly added some perimeter fencing and opened them up. But this was a really good way to improve our pastures by applying sort of large amounts of broiler manure. And also, we had limited capital expenses to get into doing meat bird production. We also added some pigs. Mostly this was for our own pork production, but also for having enough to then sort of cover those expenses and sell a few on the side. We also used them to turn our compost. Again, we were using horses. We didn't have a good way. We didn't have a tractor with a bucket, and so finding innovative ways to use animals was important. Um, And then we also had many parts of our farm that were sort of more of like a homestead. Like we maintained a family cow for many years, and that was we weren't selling milk products commercially. I think a few got sold here and there, but it was not legal. But mostly this was for ourselves, for to have all the milk we needed: butter, cheese, yogurt, ice cream. A fairly big time commitment, both in milking twice a day and making all those products, but a good fit for Karen being home all day to be able to do things that made it so we didn't have to buy milk products, and again we could then also know exactly where it was coming from. Um, there's been a lot more interest in, I think, in raw milk these days, but being able to produce our own milk was very important. And then also, as you'll see, my daughter scattered throughout these pictures. I mean, she was on the farm, involved in sort of all aspects of the farm. She's never been a farm worker on the farm by any means, but she's always been involved, and that's how she grew up, knowing and being part of the farm. As we figured out that there were some really good vegetable farmers in the area, and the market, although probably not saturated, was full of people that were going to be able to do it better and probably more cost effective than we were. We continued growing crops, but limited what we grew. It didn't take more than probably a season for us to realize we were going to not be growing watermelons and squash and cucumbers, and that they were things that not only required sort of skills we didn't have, but also many of them you have to pick quite often. And so we fairly quickly gravitated to crops that were storage crops, that we only had to harvest once a week, and that if we took the market and didn't sell them all, we could bring them home and take them the next week with very little loss. And so we moved on to things like early on we were growing dry beans, popcorn, potatoes, squash, and we did a lot of herbs. And the herbs, although they were perishable, we also brought them home, then dried them, and then we had dried herbs to sell in the fall. I mean, as expansion happened on the farm, we started adding structures, sometimes fairly quickly because we needed room, converting horse trailers into storage, and um, finding cheap hoop structures, and uh, sometimes the growth was quicker than we had planned for, but trying to work within in those constraints. Um, we were able to get some grant funding over the years, especially early on, for things like high tensile fencing. This hoop house structure was part of a research grant we wrote to work on overwintering perennial herbs. And this was like over 20 years ago, and really hoop houses were really just being um, they weren't commonplace on farms yet, and so we did some of the early work growing undercover and doing, as I said, research related to, in this case, trying to keep things like rosemary and sage and other things through the winter, not necessarily for production in the winter, but just in a protected area so that they would survive. And crops like rosemary, it's a real hit miss outside, but we developed some really good ways to grow them in an unheated high tunnel or greenhouse and have them produce year after year. Our started expanding what we sold at market. As far as the quantity, we reduced some of the vegetables, but again, the market has really been really important to us because we have a spot there every week, and we can basically bring different stuff, each week. And over the years, our stall has really changed, and it's been allow us to change but still go to the same market. So moving on to sort of what I would call the sort of years of production. After 5 to 6 years, we build up some infrastructure, sort of figured out things we wanted to concentrate on, and it's when we really sort of started catching our stride as far as producing more and selling more. Without the farm size still stayed the same as far as we didn't buy any more acreage or expand into any more fields. We just started utilizing what we had and adding some infrastructure to make it all work. And so during this time, we basically maxed out it. We were raising about 400 chickens for as laying hens. We started with different breeds such as Rhode Island Reds, and then we moved on to Black Australorps, which we actually started breeding. And you can see those two different setups. This previous one is our winter layer house, so the birds move in there for the winter. It's where they are now. It's a open air structure, not open air, but a clear structure off our main barn. And it has outdoor access, but it allows good protection of them in the winter. Really good sun that comes in that warms there. And especially when we had high production, we had pretty good density in there, which keeps it fairly warm. And then our summer setup, which is a non-mobile hoop house in the center of a pasture where we rotate the birds around with electric netting, which we've used basically for all the different animals over the years. And then as I said, we also did meat production. We changed from those Salatin pens to using a mobile structure that we moved around. And at our peak, actually, we're breeding all our own broilers. In almost everything we did, we kept on looking at things and saying, do we believe in what we're doing? Like we were buying all these birds from hatcheries. Do we believe in shipping birds in the mail? They're coming from conventional hatcheries, but they're allowed in organic because they haven't eaten or get any feed by the time they reach us. Can we do better? Can we do our own breeding? So we started breeding all our own meat birds, which is quite a proposition because generally speaking, birds are hybrids. So we actually had to do a lot of breeding. We bred our own layers, as I said before. So that added a whole new layer to the operation. We also did meat ducks. These are pecans again that we were breeding. A little easier breeding because we were just sort of selecting within them to see what worked. But again, it meant keeping a flock year round for breeding production. We were also doing turkeys. We started with just the standard whites and then moved into breeding our own. I think these are Narragansetts. And that was probably, I'll talk about our evolution of meat production, but turkeys were one of the first things to go because they were I could talk a lot more about them, but they were kind of a pain, and they were also this fairly long production, and they culminate in one processing and selling to someone that sometimes weren't our customers for the rest of the year. They were just coming to us for turkeys. So when we eliminated turkeys, we really didn't lose much of our clientele other than just not producing turkeys anymore. And part of the producing all these animals, we did put in a small hatchery. So this is, I think we could do about 180 eggs at a time, and we were hatching out um, whether it was chickens or for meat, chickens for as layers. We hatched out silkies. We did the turkeys, we did the ducks. So for a fairly long time, especially early in the spring, we were hatching out birds for quite a long time. Um, but something that my wife got quite good at doing that. So and in all these things, we had a division of labor. We worked together, but many times we had a pretty classic division of labor. I mean, she did lots of stuff with the plants. She was really good with animals. I did a lot more of the construction, a lot more of the horsework, and she did almost, I mean, all the marketing and would be attending market. And that those divisions have sort of stayed pretty much over the years, and they were not ones that were put upon us, but ones we decided upon. And there's some of those black ostrolorps coming out of the incubator. Um, as part of the poultry, we did do all our processing on the farm. There is 1,000 bird annual limit, which we basically stuck to, which was fine because we didn't want to get any larger than that. But it did mean that we did do all our processing of all our birds on the farm, and we set up a pretty simple processing facility. And we're able to, over the years, really develop a very efficient way of processing birds, um, and never sent birds off the farm. And um, since we were certified organic, which I don't know if I've said at this point, if we'd sent the birds off the farm, we'd have to send them to a certified organic processor. And I think even to this day, we don't have one that we could send it to. And we also just didn't want to be sending birds, in a trailer off to someone else to process them. Um, we were both, before becoming farmers, were vegetarians. My wife was a vegan. And so we aren't now, but we wanted to know where our meat came from, and we still do. So um, that meant really paying attention to how it was produced, how it was slaughtered, sort of all steps of production. And so many times that meant that we would do all the parts of production on the farm because we didn't have a good way of sending them somewhere else where we would trust what was going to happen. And so this is some of the chicken and ducks that we processed. We would do all the processing. They'd get chilled on the farm. We'd bag them up. And early on, we sold them fresh, kind of under a subscription. But as the years went on by and we had a freezer, we would freeze everything and sell it either on farm or at the market. Pigs were something we really got into pretty deep. So for about 15 years there, we had anywhere from 6 to 12 sows year round that we were breeding. These are mostly Tamworths here. We built a sow barn that they weren't confined to, but was for basically for some for the winter, and also for these mobile stalls for farrowing. And then um, we had that was built with a deep litter pack. And a lot of these things we did gradually. When we first started raising pigs, and when we were farrowing, we didn't have a dedicated structure. We kind of fit them into like our poultry system. And we learned, okay, this is what we need to do. We didn't just build some expensive building and then go, oh, that was wrong. We did it gradually so we'd make fewer mistakes. Of course, we've made mistakes along the ways, but I want to think that we made fewer by doing it slowly and with a lot of education and information along the way. And then we would raise up a lot of the pigs for our own meat production that we would sell. And these were mostly on another pasture on the farm. And then we'd also have the sows in a different part that we would breed and maintain throughout the summer. Farrowing twice a year, and selling a lot of breeding stock, and also feeder pigs to other producers that were doing their own production. Sometimes people that were just raising one or two for for themselves, and sometimes, other farmers are raising a dozen for meat production for their farm. And they're really cute. We loved raising pigs. One, I think we got fairly good at it. Farrowing piglets is challenging. The Northeast is not the most hospitable climate, as most of you know, and it just varies so much from negative 20 degrees to 70 degrees, and in 36 hours you can have a 70 degree temperature switch. And when you're dealing with, farrowing piglets, that can be really challenging. So we worked on systems where we could accommodate those huge swings in temperature and wind and snow and everything else. So, and there's my daughter, of course, at every part of the production. So I guess she's being helpful here. So, another shot of just raising them on pasture. So we would move them through the pastures with not electronet in this situation, but in a movable poly wire. It's electric. Um, and we raise them on pastures, somewhat usually separate from some of our cow pastures, because uh, unless you move them a lot, they really do dig up the ground. And um, pigs, are not ruminants, so they still do need feed. So even if they are, quote, pasture raised, they're still getting most of their nutrition um, from feed. And here's some of the products. So we were able to work with a regional butcher in this area, about an hour and a half away, and that was certified organic in how they handle things. So which means the animals are kept separate from the other ones, so that you're getting your own meat back. Any value-added products have to be labeled as certified organic, have to have organic spices, and organic processing. And so we worked early on with that butcher and slaughterhouse to develop recipes and to make it so that we could actually have organic meat. Early on, when we were raising even organic pigs, we didn't have organic meat because we didn't have processors to work with that would maintain it as organic. So this has been one of the partners we've worked with for years, because to sell pork and beef, basically red meat, if you're going to sell it either on the farm or as cuts or at market, it has to be USDA certified. And so we can't process it on the farm unless we put in a basically USDA slaughterhouse, which is way beyond what we could do from the size that we want to be and the cost. It just wouldn't make sense. The poultry is a different matter in that there is an exemption, a state exemption, where we can, as I said, we can produce and process on the farm, and we were able to sell that meat both at the market and on our farm. But though there's been some changes over the years, but we could not sell that into a supermarket. So when we sold meat to our local co-op for years, we only could sell them our pork and our beef, and not our chicken, which was fine because we really didn't, especially with the chicken regulations, we weren't able to get that big and didn't want to get larger than we were, and we could sell everything we produced in our other marketing venues. We also added cows, and this is started with all Highlands, and then started adding some other breeds over the years as we sort of diversified that. And we've always rented a bull from a neighboring organic farm that's a Red Angus, and bred that in each year for the calves that we're going to grow up and sell for meat. And all these different sort of meat operations were all very integrated. So we did multi-species grazing on all our pastures. The cows are being moved from paddock to paddock, to temporary paddocks set up with electric wire within a high tensile fence. But in those same areas at another time in the year or in the cycle, there may be broiler chickens, there may be layered chickens, even some pig integration. And so we were able to use the same piece of ground many times throughout the year, and that allowed us to do a fairly high level of production on a fairly limited pasture base. Um, We don't produce our own grain or our own hay. As you saw from the first image, the size of the farm, we don't have, acres and acres of flat land for producing, hay and grain. So we work with other certified organic producers to and we buy in square bales and round bales of hay for our cows. And we worked with Lakeview Organic Grain. Um, for our grain for our animals. And again, that was another relationship similar to relationship with our butcher, in that like we were one of their first feed customers when they were just producing, some extra feed on their farm, and they grew to be a fairly large feed producer, selling feed throughout the Northeast, and also working with um, hundreds of organic grain farmers in the region to develop an organic grain production. And so we were glad to be part of that as far as a customer to help develop that organic land base that really didn't exist when we first started. When we first started doing animals, we bought some local feed, but we couldn't buy organic feed. And now there are several other producers of organic feed, and Lakeview has actually moved on to now seed production. But for 20 years there, they were sort of the predominant um, uh, organic feed producer in our area. And throughout this, we did eggs and also duck eggs. And as you can see, over the years also we added some additional certifications. We became certified organic in 1998, but we added animal welfare approved, which is it's just based on animal welfare, and it was a standard that early on. The standards are really, really good. We couldn't even meet them. We had to make some changes to our operation. We actually able to get some grants that helped us meet those. And then we also, I don't think it's on this label, but also are now part of the Real Organic Project. Organic standards are really a floor, and over the years, people have found a way to sort of stay certified, but sort of get around some of them. And so there is this project called the Real Organic Project that has sort of tried to stay true to some of the early ideas of what organic farming is. And we really believe that, you know, organic farming should be based on growing in the soil and not hydroponics, that animal production shouldn't be confinement based. And some of those things like hydroponics confinement have made their way into organic, and we don't believe in it, but it is it has gotten in there. And so the Real Organic is basically a label saying, hey, we believe in these additional things that are beyond what is being enforced within the USDA organic regulations. We continued on our crops as far as storage crops, and really dialed down into doing potatoes, onions, garlic, a few other vegetables here and there. Herb production mostly centered in the high tunnels, but some strips of annual herbs. Um, and basically decided to learn how to do that well. We figured out how best to use animal cultivation in all of that. Cover crops, improving our soil. We produced lots of animal manure, so those got applied to the fields. We were able to produce really good crops throughout the years. These are some cipollini onions, and I think in shallots, potatoes. Garlic has been something we've just continued for all the years. It's been a really good crop for us. And we've added winter squash as one of the crops we grow. Through marketing, in addition to the market, we've also always sold on the farm. It started out as a small little room off our main barn, with a can for people to put money in for eggs. And it's grown to that. About 7, 8 years ago, we built a dedicated facility for not just the farm store, but also has our walk-in freezer, walk-in cooler, and some processing area for, washing eggs, for cleaning vegetables. And this was, again, we were able to get some grant funding to work with to help build this and also expand our greenhouse operation. So this is the inside of our self-serve room, a far cry from what we used to the room we used to use. I don't have a picture of that. It was kind of a dingy room. Um, but probably can't quite see it, but on the center to the left on the table there, there's a scale, there's a small can, and that is the original can that we started with in 1996, where people put money in, and 30 years later, we still have the same can. So this self-serve business of people showing up, that's a freezer for meat. The one on the right is for eggs. There's vegetables there. There's actually some plants. We resell livestock feed, originally from Lakeview Organic Grain, now from another farm. And people come and put a few bags of feed in their car, come up and get some eggs, maybe get some plants, maybe get some potatoes, leave the money, and we never see them. We never interact with them, and we just take the money out of the can. And we're far enough away from the road, among other things. And again, that can has never been stolen, and it's not uncommon. There's three or $400 in it by the end of the day, and we take it out and start again. So it's been something that's worked really well for us, and we've expanded that to include our seasonally our greenhouse production as far as selling self-serve plants. And so that was sort of the peak of our especially our meat production. I wouldn't say our production because the our size of our farm and the sort of gross of our sales has actually stayed pretty much the same for the last probably almost 20 years. We've just changed what we've done. So um, about 2019, 2020, for many different reasons, we decided to mostly transition out of livestock production. We weren't getting any younger. That was real physical, very physical to do all the animal production, processing chickens or poultry probably once or twice a month for about 6 months. The handling of the pigs. We really enjoyed it, but decided to sort of change our focus. My wife got Lyme disease right around then, and her physically for a while it became clear that hey, we needed to make some changes. Um, I haven't mentioned much about labor, but we had interns and apprentices throughout the year seasonally. Then went on to paid labor, but also realized we didn't really want to manage people. And so we didn't want to continue on something that needed a lot of off-farm or added labor other than ourselves. So we moved on to, we've always done plant production, but we basically replaced most of the meat production with plants. Um, we built this conservatory off the farm to be able to overwinter um, nursery stock and plant um, cutting material for the next season. Um, this is it in the sort of the middle of winter, packed full of literally thousands of plants and probably 400 different varieties of plants. We increased our early season light bench production. This is probably in sort of late February, early March, before we started the greenhouse, being able to use some of the heat of the house and then these light benches with some heat mats to start very small plants that eventually would go on to go into much bigger containers. But we could max out these light benches before having to start up a greenhouse in the cold of spring. And doing everything, basically all our own production. So not bringing in almost no no plugs or additional plants, doing everything from seed, from cuttings. Kara is amazing what she can do as far as plant production, and is this is something I'm not good at, and she's amazing at. Um, we did definitely got into succulents, not sort of before the wave started, of it being a real popular thing for houseplants, but something that we definitely enjoyed doing, and were able to grow that as the market for that grew. Um, as I said, we live near Ithaca, New York, which is where Cornell University, Ithaca College, and TC3 are. And so every year, come mid-August, thousands of new students show up that have never seen us and need a plant for their dorm room. And so for about 6 weeks in the fall, and it continues farther than that, but we have this huge influx of people buying plants, and it's been quite an important part of our business. Um, we don't like using plastic, so we don't buy any new plastic. So all the succulents go in recycled, thrifted pots, and then our other production, like our transplants and such, we're always scrounging a lot of plastic, but not buying it because again, we don't want to use plastic. Um, this is our main greenhouse. It probably in May or maybe a little earlier. We're always flipping these benches, meaning we grow something, we sell it, we fill it back up. So we're able to keep a fairly small greenhouse. This is I think a 22 by 48, producing and full, and it's very sort of make really good use of the space, and only having to heat it for probably 5 or 6 weeks in the spring. We do have a few signs up down by the road, but actually over the years we've taken those down, and we still get plenty of business up on the farm, to sell the plants that we sell on farm. As I said, we don't like plastic, or don't like buying it, and so we use these reusable, excuse me, not reusable, compostable pots. And again, we've had to work with pots that are allowed in organic production many times. Things like this, they look nice and natural, but they have all sorts of substances in them, so they don't break down too quickly. And these ones are paper-based ones, and they can be a real pain because they break down, but they we've figured out a way to work with them. Just more pictures of plant production. This is we basically do early season transplants, like lots of herbs, tomatoes, and peppers, and then we move on to house plants and tropicals for the rest of the year. Still selling some herbs. Um, this is our same market stall that you've seen in the other pictures. It just changes week by week. This is probably early in the season where we have perennial crops like rhubarb. We harvest ramps from the woods. Here we still have some garlic from the year before, and we're starting to have some plant production drift in there. And we pack our stall full of plants. And we do one really large plant sale. It's actually at our market, but on a different day, and that's a huge revenue boost for us early in the season. All these changes also allowed us to have more time on the farm, and enjoy sort of what we've built, and do things that aren't necessarily centered around production. So my daughter built a rock garden when she was a teenager, and we've maintained that. House gardens for our own vegetables that we get a lot from our fields and also other producers, but it's nice to have some close to the house. Um, we've basically finished our house finally over the years. So that's sort of the sort of left-hand side is what we started with, and we probably tripled the production of or size of the house. Um, we have a really nice flower garden. Whenever my daughter comes back, that's where she ends up. Um, and we have time now to get off the farm, and this is we're part of an organization for draft horses, and we were carting around that a few years ago, and my wife actually had broken her leg because she plays roller derby or had played roller derby, and so we were going around with a small horse. Um, so that is, I think I'm at the 12:45 mark. What I have for slides, um, I'll just, I mean, David mentioned that about us, some of the things that we believe in, and sustainability is really important. And as he said, um, it's more than just environmental sustainability. We wanted to be we've never sacrificed our organic values over the years. That's something that we would stop farming if we had to do that. We just we Organic is really important, but beyond the environmental aspects like that, financial, being able to pay our bills, being able to retire, those are all really important things. And so we found ways between our production on the farm. As I said, I've had a half-time job, which has helped with some financial security. Um, Especially like healthcare. And so we found that balance. We know plenty of farms around us that have decided not to go the off-farm job route, but we like that balance. I enjoy the science and being on the farm half the time and off the farm the other half. Um, and then there's the personal aspects of how do we keep, how do we stay married? How do we not, stay healthy? How do we not go crazy? Those we definitely have seen other farmers put their head all the way into just farming, and everything else gets put on the back burner, and it has its effects. And um, they end up, many of them end up stop farming because they physically can't do it. They no longer have a relationship. They were not making any money, and so we wanted to make sure that we looked at all those. We built a farm that would look at all those different aspects of sustainability. Um, and we've also put in things that really have limited our growth. We did have a little money to buy the farm. It was actually very inexpensive, not the case now. But we didn't want to go into debt. We use horses, which really limits our growth to some extent. We didn't want to be a farm that just had employees and grew and grew and grew. And we knew that from very early on. So those sort of limits really did affect how big we got and sort of what we could do. And we were fine with that. We definitely are around a lot of Amish producers, and I recognize that they have, some of them is more of a religious thing, but they have things in their society they've put in place that really do potentially limit what they can do, and we see that as actually a good thing. Uh, and we've also been able to, throughout the years, stay sort of connected to the farming community, um, and be social, and involved. And so we have an event at our farm every Sunday. We've been doing it for over 25 years, where other farmers come and we have dinner every Sunday. Usually at our farm, sometimes others, and so we remain connected and with all our fellow farmers. We've been part of lots of different organizations, on boards, as presidents and vice presidents and secretaries. We presented at conferences. So staying involved and getting off the farm has been really, really important. Farming can be a really solitary endeavor, and by being involved in the community, that's been really important for us to be able to still enjoy it after all these years. I think that's mostly what I got, and I'll take any questions.
Awesome. I'll say so. I'm looking up for some questions.
I'm
Uh,
gonna I'm gonna go off I'm gonna stop sharing.
yeah, that's great.
Okay.
So I told folks not to turn on videos before, and I've been scolded. You're welcome to turn on your video. And so I'm seeing a few questions, but I wanted to see if there were any producers or service providers that had questions for Michael. I was going to have you pop them into the chat. And let's see here. I have some, if they're more light.
I can see. Do you want to just go through the chat?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can.
go
I
for it.
can.
That's awesome.
Okay. Our daughter. So she ended up. She didn't expect it, but she actually ended up going to Cornell, which is literally just half an hour from here. So agriculture, farm related, um, sh- plant related, and she's a botanist, and is about to go on to be a postdoc. I can't say yet, but it sounds like it maybe someplace in Boston. And and so she's not really involved in agriculture. She's much more involved in science. Um, how she's studying plant defense. We don't actually see it likely that she will go on to like take over the farm, and we could potentially be a one generation farm. We're actually completely fine with that. We've never pushed her in any of these endeavors, but it does kind of make sense that she went in the plant direction because of that was her background and how she grew up. And she's about well, she's 29 now.
Michael, there's some questions. There's two questions at the very end that I know are coming from growers and grower organizations. So I'd love you to be able to answer this.
Okay. I'll just answer the bartering question, then I'll get to the end there.
Sure.
Bartering is common, especially at market. You know, when you get to the end of the day and you have limp lettuce and cucumbers that you really can't bring the next day, then we definitely there's a lot of people coming around throwing vegetables at us and us throwing eggs at them, and well, not throwing eggs, but giving them eggs. And so there's definitely a lot of that, and it's allowed us not to have to grow all the crops because we know we're going to be able to get them from another organic producer fairly easily, and they could then offload stuff that would just go to the compost pile or the pigs. I'll go to the end there. Yeah, so the vegetables that we grow are basically potatoes, garlic, onions, shallots. Um, those are the main ones, but we also do winter squash. We maybe getting out of it, but we also did popcorn, not a lucrative crop, but something that we mostly did to because we loved homegrown popcorn. And then we may be integrating some more herbs back in, but herbs was a big one for years there. But we're using a lot more cover crops than we did, so we're sort of alternating between cover crop strips and cash crops. So even that 1 acre plus the high tunnels, it gets more like an acre and a half. We're not getting production out of that whole area annually. Um, Compost manure. So we've moved away from using as much compost manure, mostly because we were raising our phosphorus levels too high. So we have moved to rely a lot more on cover crops and nitrogen crops like clover and peas for nitrogen. Uh, but we still use some compost, but we basically have more of that is going onto our pastures now, which can benefit more than our fields, which are very high in organic matter. Our vegetable fields, very high in most fertility, and nitrogen is the main thing we're having to find ways to get it not from compost or manure.
Michael, do you see there's a question on federal funding, just about the question on what vegetables we still grow?
Um,
So I'll just read it. Have you received any federal funding to help build your farm? If so, what types and for what?
sure. Well, early on we get some, but we were definitely sort of felt we were kind of skipped from lots of the programs. You know, if you grow conventional corn and soybeans, you get huge amounts of subsidies, and the small guys like us don't. We've been one of the things I've done is look for grant funding, and I think we've gotten pretty good at it. So we have, if there's a program, I probably know about it. And so we have looked for every different thing that would help us, whether that's financially or other advice, and definitely utilize them. So we have got programs to help with fencing, um, water lines, uh, high tunnels. Um, More in the last 5 or 6 years, there have been a lot more assistance programs that the small vegetable producers have actually qualified for. There were some COVID relief programs that were amazingly, generous that we were able to be part of. Politically, over the last few years, we appear to be more of an important group that politicians like to throw money at, and so we've gotten some money from those programs. And after years and years of not being part of these programs, we said, fine, we'll take it. So we've used it to, we may have seen in some of those pictures we have solar, and we paid off all our solar. Some of the or the COVID relief out allowed us to buy a used skid steer. So we actually now do have a quasi tractor on the farm for just for moving around, mostly compost and moving pallets and such. So yeah, so I would say we now do get some federal funding. We have a CSP, which is Conservation Stewardship Program, which helps reward us for a lot of the environmental things we've done over the years, and but encouraging us to do more. Um, so yeah, that we now I believe we do get some funding. Uh, I think I'll just go back to the top unless there's another one you want to.
A good question. Yeah. Any advice for farmers trying to plan for retirement on their own? I was really hoping you'd address this. So this is
I
great.
don't know. We did definitely do some retirement planning fairly early on. And I think it's important just to rather than just ignore it and say, "Oh, I'm a farmer, I'm not going to have any money," and move on, is 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 to see, okay, what is important. I mean, if it is important to you to think that, hey, I'm not going to farm for my entire life and I need to have money, you need to develop a plan. So we definitely put some money early on and have continued to put small amounts of money into things like IRAs. But um, one of the things we decided that we didn't have money for, we didn't put money aside for my daughter's education. We're like, that's going to be $250,000. We are not going to have it. We're going to have to rely on financial aid to do that. And that worked out surprisingly, amazingly well. As farmers, we generally, on paper, are poor. Um, and she, between being an excellent student